So the plan for today is very simple. I want you to watch the calculations workshop 2, which goes through many different GPhC style questions, and I want you to work through calculations pack 6, which has 10 GPhC style calculation questions. In this video, I'm going to include the entire 1 hour webinar for the calculations workshop 2 for you to watch, particularly for all of you non-members who do not have access to the membership. So hopefully you find today useful, and I will see you tomorrow.
All right, fantastic. Hi, everyone. My name is Nkesia. Thanks, Isia, for the introduction. For those of you who are here for the last webinar on calculations, this is going to be another workshop, really getting all of you to understand what calculations are, what's going to be expected of you in the GPhC registration assessment, and really giving you all the opportunity to ask any questions and just reinforce that we here at MicroPharm we're here to support you in your journey as trainee pharmacists on the road to actually qualifying. I am a huge fan of interaction, so the more interaction in the chat, the better. We will be doing some calculations as well, so do have your calculators on you, ideally your GPhC approved ones, but I will be talking about that really soon. So just a little bit about me as an introduction, although I did mention a lot of this in the last session, but if you weren't able to attend that one, absolutely fine. So my name is Nkesia, which is NK for short. I'm the Divisional Lead Pharmacist for General and Specialist Medicine at Ashford and St. Peter's Hospital. I did my pharmacy degree at Durham University, which is now Newcastle University, if anyone Googles it and nothing comes up. I did my pre-reg year at Ashford and St. Peter's from 2019 to 2020. I was one of the cohort of trainee pharmacists who, unfortunately, because of COVID, the exam got delayed. So I was provisionally registered for, I think, between August 2020 and March 2021. I qualified after passing the exam the first time, rotated between a few different clinical specialties. I was the interim divisional lead for hematology and oncology from November 2022 to mid 2023. And now I cover respiratory medicine, palliative care, care of the elderly, but I also support trainee pharmacists with calculations as well, and some other clinical areas. I think one of the main things that I want all of you to remember as far as calculations go is that your success as far as part 1 of the registration assessment really comes down to knowing your question type. Now, it'll be really interesting to see in the chat how many of you have already gone away and looked up this list of different topics or question types. Put a quick yes in the chat if you have, put a no in the chat if you haven't. Again, it's just to get a bit of a feel as to where we all are in terms of preparing for the exam. I'm seeing lots of yeses, which is a positive sign. That's fantastic. Knowledge really is power. And knowing how you're going to be assessed in the GPhC exam is super important. So at the very least, if you know how you're going to be asked these questions and what types of questions you're going to be faced with, it will make a difference. Now, my next question is, how many of you have ranked them in terms of priority? So a traffic light system, which ones have you highlighted to say that you do understand them? Which ones have you highlighted to say that you don't understand them? Again, quick yes or no. How many of you have sort of ranked how easy you find these different topics, and how many of you haven't done that yet? It'll be, again, really interesting to see where you guys are. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple of not yets. No. Okay, again, that's absolutely fine, but it is incredibly important that you do that. Okay, so for those of you who have already seen modules 1 and 2 that Yasir and I have put together for calculations on the MicroPharm platform, one of the things that I do talk about is that traffic light system. So this list, highlight the ones that you don't understand in red, highlight the ones that you do understand really well in green, the ones where you're kind of in the middle in yellow, and then just prioritize accordingly. Okay, so just do keep that in mind. Now, for those of you who weren't here last time, And module 3 is actually live as of today, which is fantastic. So for those of you who've already finished module 1 and 2, you can jump right into module 3, and we will be working on getting module 4 out to you in the near future. My next question, for those of you who didn't attend last time, what are some of the questions that you tend to ask yourselves about calculations? Because I think these are the really common ones that I've come across in my personal experience or in mentoring or tutoring trainee pharmacists. How can I avoid running out of time? Major question when it comes to calculations. I think most of us ask that question. How do you understand the questions? How do we even answer them? That tends to be a really, really common question as well. And why are the questions so difficult? Put a quick thumbs up in the chat if these are all the questions that you've asked yourself at one point or another, or do feel free to pop any more questions that I've missed on this slide that you ask yourself or you've heard others ask about calculations. Again, it'd be really interesting to see how all of you feel about calculations. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, are you confident with them? Are you not confident with them? Or do these questions that I put on the slide right now, does this encapsulate everything? So Alia, you've said that the second question is perfect because it doesn't, you don't necessarily know what the question is asking for you. And we're going to go through 3 example calculation questions today. These ones are going to be slightly more challenging than the ones we went over in the last workshop. And hopefully that will give you a bit of exposure to the types of questions that the GPhC are very likely to ask you. And Kevin, you've said that phrasing can sometimes catch you out, and I think it catches a lot of us out, and that's why practice makes perfect. It is super critical that you make the time to really get a feel as to how the GPhC will ask these questions. And if you can master that, it's all exam technique. You will get better with calculations, and you're more likely to succeed in part 1. Kunjal, you've said that, which question are you meant to use because things might overlap. So I think all of these questions really they're all valid and there is a bit of overlap between them. So I think to me that suggests that actually all these questions sort of relate to you. And Daphne, you've said that the third in terms of what numbers to use. So we're going to be looking at a few different questions today. We're going to look at 1 or 2 on infusion rates. And we're also going to look at another on, I cannot remember whether it was suppositories or quantities to supply, but we will get to those questions shortly. And hopefully you all have your GPhC calculators. So firstly, time management. Okay, one of the massive questions that we ask ourselves is how much time do you have in the exam? Remember that part 1 is made up of 40 calculations. You have 2 hours to complete these, and you will be able to use a calculator. Now, 2 hours is 120 minutes. To answer 40 questions, you've got 3 minutes per question. Now, in the last workshop, what we saw was some of the questions, a lot of you fed back that 3 minutes dragged for you. But for other questions, 3 minutes felt really tight. And to that, what I'm going to say is that you won't need 3 minutes for every single question. Some questions in the GPhC exam will only take you a minute. Some might take you 4 minutes, but then hopefully it'll average out to 3 minutes. It's more than enough time for you to read the question, highlight relevant bits of information, digest the information, and then actually attempt the question, and then look over your working out. Okay, so time yourself when practicing questions independently. And I am going to set a timer using my phone in this workshop. So anytime we go over questions, I'm going to time you. When time's up, you put down your pen. Okay. The best thing that you can do for yourself as you prepare for the GPhC exam is to be honest with yourself as far as whether you ran out of time or not. If you find that you're running out of time all the time as you practice, but then actually you say, oh, well, I would have finished that, you're not holding yourself accountable. Okay. And you won't be able to do that come the actual exam. So just do keep that in mind. Now, on that note, for calculator use, the other thing I'm going to really stress to you is get one of these calculators, okay, one of the ones listed on the screen, and practice with that calculator and that calculator alone. How many of you listening now have already gone out and bought one of these calculators and started using it to practice? Say yes if you have, and if you haven't, then please do so. All right, fantastic. I'm seeing lots of yeses in the chat. Okay, it is so, so important that you make the time to find a calculator that's approved and that you get used to using it. Unlike GCSE and A level, you haven't got that nice scientific calculator where you can store answers, or you can just press the answer button and it saves what you did the previous step. You have to use one of these. And if you use one of these and you get used to using them, you're not going to panic when it comes to the exam. Remember, the GPhC exam is now on a screen, so it's not paper anymore, it's all online. And so whilst you have a desktop calculator, I found that it was very clunky. I didn't quite use it. I found that it was quite difficult to use. I preferred having a physical calculator that I could press and I knew that I was typing the right things in at the right time. If you take in a calculator that is not permitted, they won't let you into the exam room with it. So you'll have to leave it outside. And that could be one of the most nerve-wracking things in the world, to go into your exam and to be told you can't use that calculator, because then by default you get into this tailspin of, oh, I can't do it without the calculator, and then you're already on the back foot. Pick a calculator and use it as you practice. The next thing I'm going to remind all of you is that these aren't just calculations questions. These are pharmacy practice questions that are being assessed from a calculations perspective. Okay, now I said this in the last workshop, and I'll likely say it in every workshop that we do, because I want to remind all of you of this very simple fact. Does that make sense to everyone? If it does make sense, just say yes. If it doesn't make sense, that's also fine, because I'm going to explain what I mean by that anyway. So when I say that the paper is not just a calculations paper, rather it's a pharmacy practice paper through the prism of calculations, does that make sense to everyone listening? I see a couple of yeses, which is fantastic. Does it not make sense to anyone? If it doesn't make sense, that's also fine, because I'm going to talk about what that means. I'll give you a couple more minutes to answer. Okay, just to keep the momentum going. What I mean by this is that I don't want any of you to go into this exam thinking, I'm just going to put the numbers into my calculator, and what the calculator spits out, I'll write down, or I'll enter onto the computer that I'm using for the exam. That's not the purpose of part one of the GPhC assessment. Now, whether you like it or not, as a qualified pharmacist, and you'll all qualify by the end of this year, is that any answers that you give, whether it's to a member of the public, whether it's to another healthcare professional, they need to be practical. Okay, they need to be realistic. And so from that perspective, if you give a number like, let's say 5.724, that might not be practical to whoever you're giving that information to. A really good example is if a nurse were to ask you on a ward, what rate should a drug be given at? And we're actually going to look at one of those types of questions today. And let's say you do a calculation and you get a number that's to 8 decimal places. So you give them that information because that's what you've calculated. Well, what if the syringe pump, okay, or the giving set only allows the nurse to input a certain number of decimal places? So that nurse will come back to you and they'll ask you, okay, well, you've given me this number, but actually I could only put in X number of numbers. So what should I put in? Okay, so already what you've now seen for yourself is that they didn't want you to just do a calculation. They wanted you to do a calculation, and then from that calculation, give a realistic answer. Okay, the same applies to patients. Okay, if they ask you a question, you need to sort of ask yourself, what's practical? What can the patient actually do? And if you look at these calculations from a real world perspective, imagine what this patient is going to do. Imagine what this healthcare professional is going to do with the information that you give them. You'll be much better equipped and feel so much more confident as you approach these questions. Okay, now does that make sense to everyone? If it does, fantastic. If it doesn't, we will talk about that in a bit of a Q&A session towards the end of the session, but hopefully what I have said does make sense. Okay, these aren't just calculations for the sake of calculations. The aim is to give real life useful answers, okay, that would be expected of you as a practicing pharmacist. Now, here's a question that I'd like us to do, and it's on an IVIG infusion. Okay, so this is going to be our first 3-minute timed question. So we have a 20-year-old woman, and she weighs 90 kilos, and she's prescribed immunoglobulin 10%, 1 gram per kilo as follows. 0.3 mil per kg per hour for 30 minutes, then 0.6 mil per kg per hour for 30 minutes, then 1.2 mil per kg per hour for 30 minutes, and then finally 2.4 mil per kg per hour for the remainder of the infusion. Calculate the total duration in minutes. Give your answer to the nearest whole number. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my phone, I'm going to set a timer on it, and I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes. If you get the answer before the full 3 minutes is up, then feel free to DM me the answer. Don't put it in the wider chat because I don't want anyone else to see your answer. I won't tell you whether your answer is right or not. It will just be great to see whether you're answering the questions in time or not. What I'll then do is break down the question, give you all a chance to ask any specific types of questions about these infusion rate questions, and then we'll go through the answer together. Okay, so I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes. Okay, when time is up, I'll remind all of you. If you get the answer before 3 minutes is up, then feel free to DM me the answer. But your time officially starts now. Good luck, you have 3 minutes. Okay, that's half of your time. You have 1 minute and 25 seconds left now. Not had any answers come through yet, but that's absolutely fine. We will have a little bit of a debrief before we actually get into breaking down the question itself. But if you do get an answer, by all means, feel free to send me a message on Zoom to say this is what I got as the answer. But if you don't want to do that, don't worry, we will be going through the answer all the same. Okay, I've had one answer so far. Okay, I've had a couple more answers, and I'm getting a bit of a trend here. Okay, have about 5 seconds left. Okay, time's up. Okay, so it's interesting because I was getting a lot of answers, and I could put them into one of two groups. One group, they were all very similar numbers. The other group, very, very similar numbers. A bit of a show of hands here. How difficult did you find that in terms of timing? Um, was that really difficult in terms of timing? Did you find that you were really pressed for time? Do you think it was okay for time? What are your general thoughts? And I think I probably bet that most of you are pressed for time. Yeah, so Alia, you said that you were pressed for time. Mariam, you said it was difficult in terms of timing. Yeah, Rabia, you said that you were pressed for time. In all honesty, I think immunoglobulin infusions are really challenging questions when it comes to time management because there are so many steps involved. And when you have that many steps, it can be so challenging to know in yourself that you've gotten the answer right. Now, a little bit of background on what immunoglobulin is. For those of you who might not be aware of it, it's a blood product. It is something that is considered time critical, depending on the indication. In this instance, the dosing is for ITP. But the key thing here is that the drug is being infused over a variable rate. Um, Now, IVIG is not the only variable rate drug. If you think about like your sliding scale, for instance, in patients who, let's say they have diabetes and they've had surgery and they're not eating and drinking yet, so you might put them on a sliding scale in the perioperative period to sort of control their blood sugars until they can eat and drink, and then you can reestablish them on any oral anti-diabetic medication or a heparin infusion if someone's got a really complicated thrombotic episode and their renal function doesn't allow for, let's say, a low molecular weight heparin. You'll have variable rates, and it's incredibly important that you can advise and calculate appropriately. Now, if I were to highlight parts of this question, the first thing that I would highlight is the 10% weight per volume. What does that mean to everyone? If I said 10% weight per volume, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Like if I asked you to express that in different units as concentration, what does that mean? Okay, fantastic. I'm getting some really similar answers. Yeah, 10 gram in 100 mil. Okay, that's exactly what it means. And that's really important because the first step actually is finding out what volume this patient is going to have for the infusion. Because at the moment, you've been given the steps for the infusion and these are all the rates. But other than that, you've not yet figured out what total volume you're going to give. So the first thing that I would do here is calculate the total volume. Now, 10% weight per volume is 10 grams in 100 mil. I know that 1 gram per kilo, when they weigh 90 kilograms, that's going to be 90 grams in total. So if we have this formulation, and that's a 10% formulation, 10 grams in 100 mil, and we need to give 90 grams, what is the total volume of IVIG, let's say Privigen, that this patient will have? So we know we have 10 grams in 100 mil. We need 90 grams. That's right, guys. She's going to need 900 mil. And when you remember that, that will then help you for the rest of the calculation. So 0.3 mil per kg per hour for 30 minutes. Another thing that I'd highlight here is the fact that it's only for 30 minutes. So 0.3 mil per kg per hour, we're going to do 0.3 mil times her weight, 90, and that would give you how many milliliters per kilo for an hour, but it's only going to be for half an hour. So we're not going to infuse that full amount. We're only going to infuse half of that. So 0.3 mil times 90 kilograms equals 27 mil per hour. But it's only going to be for 30 minutes. So that's going to be 13.5 mil for the first step of that infusion. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to increase it. So 0.6 mil times 90 kilos gives you 54 mil per hour for 30 minutes. So actually, this patient's only going to receive 27 mil for that next step. Then 1.2 mil times 90 is 108 mil per hour for 30 minutes, but only for half of that, so it's going to be 54 mil. And then the last part is, and this is the difficult part, we've got 2.4 mil times 90, which is 216 mil per hour for the remainder of the infusion. But how do we work this out? Well, it goes back to what you all calculated in the chat not too long ago, is that total volume. If the dosing is 1 gram per kilo using a 10% weight per volume formulation, we need 900 mils in total. Now, if we look at the first 3 steps of the infusion rate, we'll have given a total of 94.5 mil. So 13.5 mil plus 27 mil plus 54 mil gives you 94.5 milliliters. If we subtract that from the total that we're meant to give, which is 900 milliliters, that gives us 805.5 milliliters left, and we're giving that at a rate of 216 mil per hour. So if we divide 805.5 mil by 216 mil per hour, that is the same as 3.729 recurring hours. If we times that by 60, since we know that we have 1 hour and 1 hour is equal to 60 minutes, that gives you 223.75 minutes, which we would round up to 224 minutes. So 224 minutes plus 90 minutes would give you 314 minutes in total. So 314 was the right answer here. Now, this is a very, very difficult question, and I would go as far as to say the immunoglobulin questions are the most challenging, if not one of the most challenging in the GPhC assessment. And it's really challenging because you've got so many steps. We've just gone through 3 slides worth of breaking down the question itself to make it make sense. But if you can get the hang of it, and I would urge all of you who maybe didn't get the right answer to focus on accuracy for now, getting that right answer. You can then work on speed later on. Accuracy, then efficiency, not the other way around. Does that question and does the answer make sense? Anyone have any questions at all? So Ali, you said that you got confused at 216 mil per hour. So if we go back to the original question, we know that we're giving the drug at 0.3 mil per kg per hour for 30 minutes, then 0.6 mil per kg per hour for 30 minutes, then 1.2 mil per kg per hour for 30 minutes. That's the first 3 steps. And then the last part is 2.4 mil per kg per hour for the remainder of the infusion. So we know that this patient weighs 90 kilos, and we're giving the drug at a rate of 2.4 mil per kg per hour. So 2.4 times 90 is going to give you 216 mil per hour. So that's where that 216 comes from in that last step. Okay, so that 216 mil per hour is the rate for the remainder of the infusion. The challenge is knowing, well, how long is that going to take? And that's going to be the remaining volume that you've yet to infuse. And from that, you can calculate the time and then add it all up when you converted it to minutes. All right, and I see that makes sense. More than welcome. And actually, this is a very good example of how the GPhC can give you questions that integrate more than one learning objective, if you will. Because if we go back to the beginning of our PowerPoint, infusion rates is one section, but we just saw that this question involves concentrations expressed as weight per volumes or percentages, okay? And actually, I would argue this also includes a little bit of quantities to supply and doses and dose regimens. So it is not uncommon to get a question that encapsulates multiple learning objectives here. And that's why it is so, so important that you will take the time to practice these questions, really build your confidence, and really get as many marks as possible. Okay, remember, you're not negatively marked in the GPhC exam. You get marks on what you get correct. Okay. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any other questions about this immunoglobulin infusion rate question, or is that all generally okay? Just give me a quick yes or a thumbs up in the chat if that's okay, whether that's okay and we're ready to move on. If there's anything that doesn't make sense, please hold on to your question towards the end of the session, where we will have a bit of a Q&A, and we will address anything else, either about this or about any other calculations related to the GPhC examination. I see one makes sense. And so if that does make sense, I think we'll move on. So our next question is looking at pharmacokinetics. Okay, so here's one. Gentamicin has a half-life of 2 hours. If the initial plasma level of the drug given as a single dose is 4,500 milligrams per liter, what will its plasma level be after 13 hours? Okay, again, I'm going to set my timer. You have 3 minutes for this question. If you want to share your answers with me, then by all means, just DM them to me on the Zoom chat. If you don't, that's also fine. Save your answer. So when we actually go through the question, we will break it down like we did with the last one. But with that all being said, your 3 minutes officially starts now. Good luck. Okay, that is half of your time. You now have 1 minute and 26 seconds. Have had a few answers come in. I think similar to last time, I'm seeing some trends. We will go through the answers and break them down. But I think this can be a very, very challenging question. And I think similar to the last one, it can be a little bit tedious for different reasons. But I will talk you through how to approach this question or questions like these also. Or I spoke too soon. I'm getting a range of numbers now, which is always a bit interesting. Okay, let's have a look. 35 seconds remaining. Okay, and time is officially up. Now, how did all of you fare in terms of your time management? Did you guys find that you were running out of time? Did you find that you had enough time? Did you find that you were repeating your calculations multiple times when you were working out that question, and that's why you lost time? I think for a lot of you, it'll be the latter, because with these types of questions and experience, I found that it can be quite easy to forget where you are in terms of your steps. You know, how much have you divided it by? So it'd be really interesting to see whether you guys found that you had lots of time or whether you felt like you didn't have enough time. I think a lot of you will say that you had more time than you did with the IVIG question. but you may have found this question challenging for other reasons, but not a problem at all. So the correct answer here was actually 52.73. I do appreciate actually that I should have said to 2 decimal places. Did I say that on the last slide? I didn't, apologies, but to 2 decimal places. But if you didn't and you rounded it up, that's fine, don't worry. So the correct answer here is 52.73. I'm going to talk you through how I got that. 13 hours, you need to sort of ask yourself how many half-lives is that? So remember that the half-life is the amount of time taken for the concentration of a drug to half. Okay. Now, gentamicin has a half-life of 2 hours. Now, the initial plasma level at time 0 is 4,500 milligrams per liter. And the question is, what is the plasma level after 13 hours? If we divide 13 by 2, that is 6.5 half-lives. And the reason I divided 13 by 2 is because I wanted to find out what 13 hours was in terms of the number of half-lives. So if 13 hours is 6.5 half-lives, that means that this concentration is going to halve 6 times over. And then at that last point, it won't half again. It will do half of a half-life. Okay, so it'll go down to 75% or go down by a quarter. They mean the same thing. So 4,500 milligrams times 0.5 or divided by 2, it would be the same thing, is 1 half-life. So if you did that 6 times over, that would give you the concentration after 6 half-lives. So let's do that together now. 4,500 divided by 2, 2,250 milligrams. That's after your first half-life. Again, that's second half-life is then 1,125. Third half-life would be 562.5. Fourth half-life, 281.25. Fifth half-life, 140.625. Sixth half-life, 70.3125. And I actually saw some of that as some of the answers. So that's 6 half-lives. Now, this is the difficult thing. The next part is half of a half-life. So it's going to go down by a quarter. If you did 0.25, you would end up with what would happen if 75% of that half-life had happened. So you'd cleared it. But actually, if you multiply that by 0.75, that's 75% of what's remaining, which is the equivalent of subtracting half of a half-life, which is a quarter. And that's how you end up with an answer of 52.73. For those of you who put 53 or 52.7, consider that correct. Again, that's my fault for not making it clear for the 2 decimal places on the previous slide. For those of you who didn't quite get that answer, hopefully this working out makes a bit more sense. If it doesn't, please do say. You're more than welcome to sort of save questions towards the Q&A session at the end of this workshop, or if you want to give your answers or questions now, then by all means, you're more than welcome to do so. But how did everyone find that question? Did you all find it easy? Did you find it difficult, or was it somewhere in the middle? Again, it'd be really interesting to see how you all feel about this one. So I have one question, which is I divided 35.15 by 2 again, and added that number onto the 35.15 to get the answer. Would that apply to all these types of calculations? You divided 35.15 by 2 again, and you added that number on top of. So that would be fine. I think in this situation, if you're going to divide by half and then add, then it's the same as 75%. So that's not a problem. Nadia and Kevin, your question is essentially the same. So I'm going to answer it in one go. 6.5 half-lives, okay? That is 6.5 half-lives. So if you divide by a half, so let's say we so let's go through the question again. So let's see, 4,500 divided by 2, divided by 2, 2, 2 again. Okay. So if you then divided by 0.5, let's say you divide by 0.5, that's the same as multiplying by 2. So you'd go up. Okay. The reason that we times by 0.75 here is because you are working with half of a half-life. So where a half-life is defined as the time taken for your concentration to half of a half-life is the time taken for your concentration to go down by a quarter. So you'd be left with your 75%. Okay. So that's where the 0.75 came from. Alternatively, what you could do, if the 0.75 doesn't make sense, you could times by 0.25, but then that gives you a quarter. You would then need to subtract that from your concentration by the end of the sixth half-life. So in this situation, I times by 0.75 because then I knew that I wouldn't forget that last step. If that doesn't quite make sense, you could times by 0.25, but then the onus is on you to then remember to subtract that number from your last concentration. I hope that makes a bit more sense to both of you. Okay, if it doesn't, just reach out to us here at MicroPharm. More than happy to go over it in the Q&A session. And if we need to go over it afterwards, then more than welcome to do so. I've had a few responses saying that it was easy, but made silly mistakes by doing 5.5 half-lives. Again, really, really easy to do, especially when you're time pressured. And that's why the more you practice these questions, the more confident you'll get with them, and you'll pick up on the really common pitfalls that a lot of candidates have to manage. Okay, but hopefully that was useful. We've got time for one more question, and then we'll go into the Q&A, and then we'll wind up for today. A coated tablet has a dry weight of coating of 10 milligram per tablet. The coating solution is prepared to contain 10% weight per volume of coating material. How long is needed to coat a batch of 1 million tablets at a spray rate of 200 mil per minute, given that the coating efficiency is 100%? Again, I'm going to give you all 3 minutes. Okay, your 3 minutes will start now. When if you want to send me the answer, then by all means just DM me on Zoom, but then we'll break down the question all the same. Your time starts now. Getting a few answers coming through, and I'm seeing really common trends, which is great. I'm sure in saying that I've probably given away the answer, but it is what it is at this stage. That's not a problem at all. In terms of time, you officially have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. So by all means, you may find that you've already used up all the time that you need to answer the question and you're just going through your calculations again. But I'm getting some more answers in. Again, really common trend here. You all have 1 minute and 5 seconds left. Okay, I'm actually getting some slightly different answers now. Okay, just to keep it a little bit interesting. Okay, okay, we're getting a bit more of a range as well. Okay, so again, I quite like having a range of answers because then it means that rather than just saying, okay, you all get it, let's move on, it just gives us a lot more scope to sort of talk about the question, talk about the common pitfalls and how you can avoid them. Okay, and that's really the support that we give you at MicroPharm, so do take advantage of it. You've got 23 seconds left. Okay, I've actually had one of each answer now, so that actually makes it really interesting. So definitely room for discussion. Right, and time is officially up. How did everyone find that question? Was that the easiest in terms of time? I think a lot of you will say it was the easiest in terms of timing because I think a lot of you answered the question quite quickly compared to the IVIG one and the half-life one. Ale, you said that you did not understand the wording of this question, and this is a really, really common one. I think dry weight coatings are really challenging questions. Okay, so let's actually take the first minute or so to talk through the question itself. So a coated tablet has a dry weight of coating 10 milligrams per tablet. So it doesn't matter what the tablet is, the identity of the tablet is completely irrelevant. All you know is that each tablet, 10 milligrams of its weight is this dry weight coating, like a film coated tablet, if you will. The coating solution that you need for it is 10% weight per volume, so 10 grams and 100 mil. So how long is needed to coat the batch of 1 million tablets if you imagine that the machine that's spraying the solution is working at 200 mils per minute? The coating efficiency is 100%. That is the part that I think throws a lot of people off because people then think, well, what does that matter? Well, if the coating efficiency was less than 100%, that would mean that even if you're spraying a certain volume, not all of it is coating the tablet. Some of it's lost to the conveyor belt, or maybe doesn't even leave the canister. So that actually might mean that in order to completely coat the tablet, you need a larger volume because not all of your 200 mil is going towards contributing to tablet formulation. If you think about it that way and you imagine what's going on, let's say in a pharmaceutics lab, because hopefully for all of you, that's not that long ago, it starts to make a bit more sense. So that's how I approach this question. So again, what I would do here to sort of start with is say, well, 10% weight per volume is 10 grams in 100 mil. I would ask myself, well, what volume do I need in total to coat 1 million tablets? 10 milligrams, okay, is needed per tablet. If I need a million tablet, that's going to be 10 million milligrams. I then need to figure out what that equates to in terms of volume. So if I then say that I need 10 million milligrams, 10 million milligrams is the same as 10,000 grams, isn't it? If I know that I have 10 grams in 100 mil, then 10,000 grams is going to be 100,000 milliliters. So that's the total volume that I need in order to coat 1 million tablets. So then the question is then a case of 100,000 milliliters divided by 200 mil per minute. If I do that, that gives me 100,000 divided by 200. That gives me 500 minutes. So the correct answer here was E. Okay. And most, if not all of you, I think 90% of you got the answer correct. So well done. Some of you may have gotten 50. You may have missed a zero at one point. Okay. Really easy to do when you're working between that 10,000 and that 100,000. So really easy pitfall there. So that's just worth noting. Ultimately, takeaway messages. I said this in the last workshop and I'll say it again here. Remember your time management. Okay, you have 3 minutes per question. And even if you do feel pressed on one question, you will have time for another question. Okay. think about the context of the question. Okay, you are a pharmacist in training, so any answer that you give need to be practical. And finally, highlight parts of the question. Okay, break down the question to really smaller bite-sized chunks to make it easier to understand. And with all of that being said, I think that's me done. I did see that Evelyn wanted me to go back to the working out from that question. There wasn't actually any working out. I did just say it verbally, but this is being recorded, so don't worry, you will be able to go back and rewatch it. But we'll take a bit of time just to sort of answer any quick Q&A questions, and then we'll call it a day there.